The severest test at Chickamauga. After most desperate fighting and great losses, this last assault, like all previous ones, was beaten back. It is questionable whether the annals of history thus far afford a severer test of soldierly endurance and courage than in these successive charges, up steep ridges over the dead bodies of comrades. And on the other side, the men stood behind mere semblances of barricades in the open field, in single line, with bayonets and clubbed muskets, and repulsed their brave enemies time and again till sundown. It was one of the most impressive nights of my life. Silence reigned supreme and was painful. It left us alone with our thoughts of the past, present, and tomorrow. Not the chirp of cricket or katydid, nor the note of night disturbed the stillness. Only once in a while a stray picket shot roused us from our reverie and waking dreams. The moon rose above the fog and smoke along the tortuous, murmuring Chickamauga, and for a short time dispelled the gloom of darkness, and from her throne in the great vault above us sent light to friend and foe for a while, then disappeared again in the realm of darkness. There seemed to prevail a prophetic premonition of impending misfortune or disaster in the minds of many, although no one spoke of it until all was over. In truth, very few unnecessary words were spoken as we lay side by side with upturned faces and guns. But thought was busy and brought from memory visions of the past, of home, of friends, of loved ones, and then tried to peer into tomorrow and the future and ask from her responses to our mind's queries. Who will die tomorrow, and how many? Will I be one of them? Will I live to see home again? What will be the outcome of the battle? And many other mental questions until we were lost in sleep. Night passed, and so did the next day, leaving behind them thousands of dead, groaning, moaning, wounded, lying scattered over the fields and forests within the confines of those 15 miles of conflict. The following night, after the fight in the woods, we were taken back to a ridge to draw rations and bivouac for the night. It was extremely cold, and one was uncomfortable under 2 blankets, and many of the wounded lay between the lines all night without any. Clay Elson, a comrade, and I asked permission to return to the battlefield to find missing friends. We knew Sergeant David fell near the Tanyard, a distance of 3/4 of a mile, and we found him with a bullet in his hip, lying among many others. We tried to find a surgeon and finally succeeded in the darkness, but he said he did not have any material or instruments to work with. So we went to work and gathered straw from a shed and made beds in a number of huts around the tannery, and carried the wounded in to protect them from the cold, and then made coffee for as many as we could. We now hold Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge with Chattanooga, the gateway to East Tennessee in the south. The moon rose and shone upon the pallid faces and bloody, mangled forms of many brave boys in gray and blue who lay dead or wounded, scattered over the broad valley, steep mountain sides, and in dense lines and groups in rifle pits. Many thousands did not respond to roll call that night or the next morning. After the retreat of the enemy, the boys of our regiment began to scatter through the enemy's camp in search of blankets. But Colonel Manderson ordered them in line and said, "This is the way battles are lost." In a moment, every man was in place and in perfect line, and immediately Generals Grant, Thomas, Granger, and Wood, with their staff officers and escorts, came riding along the line from our right. Just as they got beyond our flag, they stopped, and General Grant said, "Men, what regiment is this?" Some immediately replied, "The 19th Ohio." General Thomas, who was of quiet disposition and never flattered or seldom praised or complimented, said, "Well, men, after taking such a position, you can carry anything in the world." In an instant, a fellow replied, "Yes, General, everything but full haversacks, as ours have been empty the greater part of many weeks during the siege." The response seemed so appropriate that it made ever the sedate Thomas, whom I never saw laugh before, and his staff break into laughter. But General Grant sat on his horse, motionless and grave, silent as a sphinx, not showing a smile or drawing a muscle on his face. The Civil War in the United States was a terrible conflict, fiercely contested by both sides, as to sweep to untimely and bloody graves 500,000 of able-bodied men and leave behind its trail hundreds of thousands more with impaired health, premature age, to drag out their lives in misery, weary, waiting for the bugle's last call. The paradise of the honeybee and the hummingbird, between New Orleans and the Gulf of Mexico. There is the paradise of the honeybee and the hummingbird, feasting luxuriously upon the flowers of the forest and fields. The somber, ghastly cypress rose high out of swamp, marsh, jungle, and mire, like mourning shrouded giants. The river during high water leaves its bounds and spreads out into numerous channels, bayous, and lakes. Vegetation struggles with water from the millions of tons of sediment and silt brought by melting snows and rains of northern climes. Small islands are formed. Some of them are floating, others become fixed. The bittern screams and wildfowl flap their wings as they rise in great numbers and sail away from intruding man.